The views expressed and the opinions given by the individual host and their guests do not necessarily reflect those of Para-X, its affiliates, or its sponsors.
Step outside of your comfort zone. See the world with a whole new perspective. Join us and experience the unexplained on the Paranormal View.
And welcome everybody right here to the Paranormal View on the Para-X Radio Network. I want to thank everyone for being with us tonight. Those in the chat room and those listening from around the world, we appreciate each and every one. If you are listening from somewhere around the world, you'd like to come over to the chat room. It's at paraxradionetwork.com and click on the chat now button and follow directions, and you'll be in with all these wonderful people, and you can chat with them and you can ask questions, and we will get those answered for you. And if you're listening from somewhere else around the world and you do not want to come into the chat room, you can send us a question by sending it to the Paranormal View what is it, Barbara?
At Gmail?
At Gmail, paranormalview@gmail.com. We will get those answered for you. All right, we have with us tonight Barbara Duncan.
Hello, everybody from Smoky, California.
Yeah, it is pretty bad out there, isn't it? Is it still hazy like it was the other day when you posted a photo?
It's just hazy right now. No Martian sky today.
No Martian sky.
Blade Runner, so many people were saying.
Seriously, it went from at 7 o'clock in the morning when I got up to go to work, the sky was really just sort of dark gray. And then it turned to like a tomato red, and then it went to a blood red, and then it went to a crimson red. So by 11:30, it was really spooky Halloween style. Martian. Yeah.
Wow. We got with us Jeffrey Gould.
Hello, hello. It was only kind of weirdly orange overcast here, and it was like everything was sepia tone. It's like the beginning of The Wizard of Oz.
Oh, wow. All right, we got a great guest, and we got a lot of questions for this person tonight. So, Jeff, you got all the info to introduce our guest?
Yes. Yep. Tonight our new guest is Christopher Balzano. He's a writer, researcher, folklorist, and current host of the podcast Tripping on Legends, and the director of Massachusetts Paranormal Crossroads. Christopher is the author of several books about regional hauntings focused on around the Bridgewater Triangle, as well as several collections of true ghost stories and how-to paranormal books, as well as appearing on television shows to comment on ghosts and urban legends. And across the country, he's appeared on radio stations and throughout the internet, widely being considered the leading researcher into Marla Brooks' favorites, Pukwudgies. And formerly, Christopher ran the paranormal news at Ghostvillage and headed up Ghostvillage for Kids, which just sounds creepy. His new book, Florida's Haunted Love Stories, focuses on haunted legends in the Sunshine State that have connections to love. So welcome, Christopher Balzano.
Thank you very much. And I'm in Florida where every night the sky is weird.
I have to wonder with a how-to paranormal book, that isn't like the meme of the guy reading the book saying, is there life after death? And he opens it, it says, step 1, die.
It's about that well written, I would say. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Wow.
Well, you could start off with the Handbook of the Dead, but
Hey.
Of the recently deceased.
Of the recently deceased, yeah.
No, those are, it's interesting because those two books, it's Picture Yourself Ghost Hunting, which is a great book, and I always get excited when people tell me that they still buy copies of it to train their paranormal investigators. And I'm like, that's amazing. And then I'd have Picture Yourself Capturing Ghosts on Film, which I'm not that proud of. We were talking before air, and in writing those two books, I really became, I would say, disillusioned with the paranormal, and it actually put me on the path that I'm on right now in the way that I approach the paranormal and spooky things. So,
such as?
Well, I mean, why did it change me?
Well, that and how did it change you?
Yeah. Well, the first thing is in writing that book, I really had to take a step back for some sections of it and become critical of what was going on in the paranormal field. And one of those, one of the more entertaining but also really difficult chapters to write was on ghost hunters and ghost hunting teams and paranormal teams and their ideas. And it was one of those, I've never been part of a team. I've investigated since 1994, probably from, I would say, 94 to 2015, 2014. And I never was part of a group because the dynamics were just too sketchy for me. And I liked surrounding myself with good people, going out and doing what needed to be done, and then leaving them, and not having to rely on whether we were wearing the same shirt or, the politics of groups. But also the other thing is as I was writing those books and kind of in the wake after it, I really became kind of soured on equipment, not only just the science of the paranormal, but also, the heavy reliance on equipment and the focus on the gathering of evidence. And I can understand it, and I don't push those people off, or I don't say I don't enjoy what they're doing or they're being silly or anything like that. It's just, for me, I found that it was an empty pursuit, that for all that we were doing in terms of trying to capture ghosts, provide evidence of ghosts, try to make sense of it, we were collecting a lot of data, and there was very rarely analysis of it. And more importantly, we were going into places that could be haunted, and we were relying so heavily on the 23 pieces of equipment we had that we didn't use our eyes, and we didn't use our senses, and we didn't use our sixth sense. We were ignoring that gut feeling because that's something that you can't present to people. Like, I felt as if there was someone watching me. Like, have you ever heard of a haunted location where something like that isn't said, and yet we push that off? We use it as a way to say that a place is haunted. Then we go in there and we ignore the fact that what led us there were these people's stories, which, I can't take your story for face value because I have to find evidence of it. And so, for a while I dropped out, and then, once you start doing the paranormal, it continues to call to you. And I really had to find my niche, and I found that my niche was legend tripping. And that is going to a location, doing a ridiculous amount of research ahead of time, trying to find out the history of this haunted story, this ghost story that might be in a location, going to the site, using some kind of trigger that matches the legend to try and spring something and have whatever the legend is happen to you, and then just experiencing it. And then afterwards reporting that, and maybe even allowing the audience to come in and see what you experienced to the best of your ability. And once I started to do that, I was having more paranormal experiences, a lot more fun, and connecting with people in a way that I hadn't before.
Yeah, I didn't get into it until like 2008. And once I did, I was able to go to different places because shortly after I got into it in 2000, as a matter of fact, it was in the fall, I started doing this radio show. They asked me to do it, and I said, who, me? I don't know anything about ghosts or anything. And but they talked me into it, and I started doing the show. Since then, I've been able to go to a lot of different places. There's only certain people that I affiliate with as far as going to places to do things with. I don't believe in all the electronics. The only thing I use is a recorder. And everything else, I mean, it's a lot of the gadgets is nice, but to me, like you said, you can't prove a lot of it.
Yeah.
If I catch
and
one,
I think recorders like video cameras, cameras and audio tape is important because it's documenting what you're there, why you're there, documenting what you're doing, and then you may actually find a little something afterwards after you get home.
Right. And I've had my share of EVPs, that I've captured, and a lot of it is really good. A lot of times, people will take and play something and try and tell you everything about it, and well, maybe, but it's not, you can't really say that's what it was.
Right.
But a lot of the stuff
our general rule of thumb is if we don't hear it plugged into the car stereo on the way home, we don't go digging for it, and sometimes, especially in the early days, what we would do is if we had a very specific little section, we would put that out as a separate little like mini episode and be like, hey, you guys want to break this down? You guys want to find stuff in it? Perfectly fine. Here's what we found when we first listened to it. And I've gotten more mind-blowing EVPs being a legend tripper than as an investigator.
Right. Well, there's with your books, and I was going through a lot of those, and I have a lot of them to talk about.
Excellent.
I'll talk to you a little bit later about when I was living in Daytona. I was about 15, and the Tomoka Light. The first time I was down there, my uncle and a couple of my cousins took me down there. And it's supposed to be from the last street light to the telephone booth at the entrance of the park. That's about a 3-mile stretch of road. And you'd drive up and down it and turn your headlights off and on. And a light would come on behind you, go out, come on in front of you. It would change shapes, colors, and stuff like that. I never tried to chase it.
The old Dixie Highway.
Yep. And I never tried to chase it. But the first night they took me out, I guess my 2 cousins was up with my uncle in the front seat, and I was in the back seat. And it was in a convertible, and they had the back window unzipped. And Roy started hollering, there it is. And I looked out the back window, and here comes this big red light coming down the road. And all you could see was my feet sticking out of the front seat.
And I don't want to get too personal if you don't want to share it. But what year was that?
That was in 1964, I believe, something like that.
Okay. So, a few years later, they changed the height of the bridge. And since they changed the height of the bridge, and I can tell you the full story if you want, we can share it. Since they changed the height of the bridge at that location, people no longer see those lights. They still see them in the woods. They still see them in the park. They still see them down the street in Bungalow Creek, where the Fairchild Oak, the suicide tree. So it's funny that's a really great example of we changed the bridge so people don't see the lights anymore. So we totally proved that legend was fake. Yeah, but what about the lights that are right there that people see?
Right.
Well, that's probably just well, what about the lights that are down the street? What about the lights that are seen on the water right over there? Well, that's probably not. It's one of those funny things. It's if you can prove one aspect of a haunting or a haunted legend negative, people feel that means then therefore the entire thing is wrong. Like if you have a fraud who investigates, a place, think of some of the famous, hauntings and cases, and one person who's associated with it has been proven to have lied about something or be a fraud, then people actually assume that the entire thing is, which is, hilarious because we really don't do that in most other things in life.
Well, the one thing that got me out, going out there at night is totally different. So
right.
I was in the Boy Scouts, and there was 3 other guys, and they wanted to get their 20-mile hike merit badge. And I was living in Harbor Oaks at the time. And we hiked from Harbor Oaks out to the campground, and they wouldn't let us stay all night in the campground. They said, Scoutmaster's not with you, you can't come in. So we walked about halfway back down where the park entrance sign is, and there's a little road that'll run over to the river from there. It's not very far. So we couldn't walk all the way back. It was already late in the evening, and we decided we had our sleeping bags. We was going to go down toward the river and camp right there. And it got dark. We couldn't get a fire started because the dew was on the ground. Everything was wet. And we just got in our sleeping bags. And everything's real quiet. And all of a sudden, I hear like 4 or 5 kids, maybe 6, on bicycles pedaling real slow down the road. You could hear them talking. You could hear them pedaling the bicycles. And this other guy says, "Hey, let's go scare them." Well, we jumped up and run up to the road. We looked down to the right, and you could see the light and telephone booth. Nothing on the road. We looked down to the left, and you could see all the way down to the last street light, or the red light in the town part down there. And nobody was on the road. And it's swamp on both sides. Kids ain't going to go off in the swamp. And they did not have time to pedal anywhere else, because it only took us just a minute to run up to the road, and they was going real slow on the bicycles. You could hear them. And all of a sudden, I seen light go out, and then a light come on. It started coming down the road, and I started hollering. The guy said, "There's the light, there's the light." And we run back down to the river and stood there for about an hour. Never seen anything go by. One car later on went by, and so we got in sleeping bags and went to sleep. But it wasn't just one person heard these kids on the bicycles, and they wasn't there when we went up there. So I have no idea what that was.
Wow. That's people have had those kind of really crazy things all up and down that Ormond Beach area, and the funny thing is that if you look at the history of it, right? So that's one of the things I do. That has got to be one of the most cursed sections of Florida. And when I say cursed, you can just kind of casually throw that thing out. But it was actually something that I was doing a presentation for a library, and they wanted to do haunted curses of Florida. And I put all the Tomoki stuff together, and it was just too long. It would have taken the entire night, because if you look at the history of that area, while other places at that same exact time, while other places were succeeding, all across Florida, that little section, that little strip, all the way from, a little bit outside Jacksonville, all the way down to Daytona and beyond, they couldn't, their plantations were never successful.
Right.
They would have murder after murder. They would have these unexplained suicides, which is how you get the Fairchild Oak, which is right there. But then also, they seemed to lead the world, or America, in slave revolts. It was like the one place in Florida that time and time again, slaves were revolting against their overseers. And it's one of the stories we were able to break was of, and they just call him the overseer, and it was this guy by the name of Huey, and he was known absolutely horrible. I mean, he was like in a long line of horrible decisions that the plantation owner made. And Captain James Ormond, who it's all that area is named for. And the story goes that either he was really drunk and none of the slaves went to help him, or that they actually killed him, but he died in that water. He died on that river, and the boat that is used to carry him, as well as the his lights going over that stretch of water onto the beach. People have seen him actually come onto the beach. When we went there, my co-host got drunk. I mean, the only way to explain it is that she felt almost immediately intoxicated and drunk, and that continued as we walked up and down the beach until we actually left the area. And she was like, "I can't." It's like it just lifted from me. So there really is a dark cloud that kind of lays over that section of Florida.
Yes, it is. And
now,
although they make great hot sauce. No, have you had the Tomoki hot sauce?
No.
It is ridiculously good. I actually had to order some online during the quarantine because I've run out of mine. Because to them, the legend of why those ghost lights are there, and the story of Tomoki is sold, right? I mean, mainly because it was designed to do that, right? It's not a real story. It's a man who they said the gods themselves dropped water where the Tomoka State Park is, and Tomoki stole a cup, and he was stealing this eternal godly water for himself when he wasn't supposed to, and it offended all of his tribe so much that a huge war raged, right? And he was nearly divisible, whatever that word is, until the woman he loved, Olita, was able to shoot him with a poison arrow. And they kind of shot each other at the same time, and they both ended up dying. And that's what they said, like, now this water is good, but it won't make you live forever if you drink it. And they published that story, and they create spoilers. It doesn't exist. It's not real. It was invented by the guy who opened the park, and he wanted to draw people in, and he wanted to, have this kind of. If you've ever been there, there's a huge statue, and they wanted something sellable, right? It's Florida. It's that's what they do best is sell attractions, and so they invented this story, and they invented this Tomoki to brand that area and have people come there and experience that legend, and along the way make really good hot sauce.
Wow.
I guess that's the origin of the Fountain of Youth story, or they were tapping into that.
Well, right, exactly. I keep in mind when I say they created, I'm talking about like in the 1950s.
Mm-hmm, okay.
And so Florida already definitely had a reputation as being the place where the Fountain of Youth is. So you'll find that story popping up pretty much anywhere there's a spring around Florida. They'll say this is potentially the Fountain of Youth, and here's an excellent story that goes with it.
Okay.
Wow.
Bizarre.
Now,
but they make good hot dogs.
I noticed on your on your
Fountain of Youth, have a drink of that and a hot dog, Yeah.
Yeah, do you know what? I'll be honest with you. Every time I take some of that hot sauce, I feel it takes a few years off of my life. It's that good and spicy. This is a big commercial. You're going to get them first as a sponsor for the show now.
Well, at least they ought to send us some hot dogs.
Yeah, let us try them out anyway. On your legend tripping site, you have a ton of things because you post your episodes and stuff on there. And the different things that you talk about. I did not realize that there was that many places around Florida that had legends to them like that.
Neither did I. When I came to Florida, I am in the lowest cultural point in all of Florida. And there's two reasons for that. One, it just has no culture. Like it hasn't been around enough. It doesn't have, because I live in Cape Coral, Florida, because it's so cookie cutter, it doesn't have any personality to it. But the other part is that people here, and I'm in Lee County, Florida, are transient, right? The majority of the houses are owned by people who don't live in this country, right? They just buy them and rent them out. The other part of them are people who have been here for 5 or 6 years. You don't drive around and see, Miami Dolphins or Tampa Bay Buccaneers stickers. You see from wherever the people are, and obviously we have a huge season where there's nothing but tourists, right? Where you can't drive on the street because all the snowbirds come down. And so when I first got here, for my first 6-7 years, I thought there were no ghostly folklore. There were no ghost stories to tell about places here in Florida. And the interesting thing that I found out is that once you open the can of worms, and most importantly, once you get out of the cities and you go to the places where people have lived for 2 or 3 generations and had time to spread these stories onto other people, that's when it really explodes. And it makes sense because the state is so huge and it's so diverse in terms of, people who live on the water versus people who are living in the central part of the state. The Panhandle is entirely different than the East Coast, which is different than the Gulf Coast. And so, you get very similar legends, which is why I'm able to write an entire book of love stories. But they have a certain flavor of whatever area that they're from.
Right. You have, and I didn't catch where it was actually from, the Cursed Children of Coker Cemetery in Arcadia.
Yes, Arcadia, Florida. That's really interesting you should say that because I just got an email yesterday about a follow-up of that. Yeah, that's, it's once you write a book about haunted Florida love stories and you send it to the publisher and you send it off, and then all of a sudden you find one the next week, and then you find one 4 weeks later, and then it's like, oh, wow, I could do a follow-up already with the amount of stories I have, and one of them is this Coker Cemetery, which for decades was allowed to just completely go into ruin. Recently, the Historical Society and the Cemetery Society, which Arcadia has because it's so history-based, has been able to go in and fix things up, and they've put a fence around it, and now they're maintaining the graves. But it is literally a family plot in the middle of an orange grove, right? And so if you don't know what you're looking for, if you don't specifically go there for that, then you would completely miss it. So it's a law that they have to maintain, and they can't plow over the graves. But that doesn't mean they have to take care of it. So the people who own the grove never took care of it. They just allowed it to, go completely wild. And the story that goes with it is that, pretty close to the 1920s, 1930s, there was a family there known as the Lotts. And they were just kind of starting out, and they didn't have a lot of money. And the mother was pregnant. And a gypsy, now you can replace gypsy with Jewish person, with black person, with foreigner, like whatever you want, because this is the story of the outsider, and then who the bad guy, quote unquote, bad guy is changes. And he was hired by the Lotts to work on their farm for a week. So he was fixing this, and he was helping to install this, and he was working on the field a little bit. And at the end of the week, he wanted his money. And Mr. Lott said, absolutely not. And he said, yes, you will. And he took out his shotgun and said, absolutely not. And so as the guy was leaving, he yelled back. He was looking at the mother, and he yelled back and said, the baby inside you will not live to be a year old. And from now until the day you die, you will never be able to have children. And he drove off. And the baby was born, and right before her first birthday, she passed away. And then they had another child, and that child passed away. And then they had another child, and they made it just past the year mark, and that child got sick, and that child died. So in this cemetery, there are a whole bunch of Eckermans or Aldermans. There's a whole bunch of Cokers, and then there's these 3 lone plots for the 3 Lott children. And it's said that if you go there, you'll see these little balls of light, these orbs, not the kind that you get in photography, but the ones you see face to face. And they'll be dancing around the graves, that they'll be floating. And now the legend says they also open and close the gate and try to escape. People who work in the groves have reported this. People who have gone to the cemetery at night before it was overgrown reported it for years. And it's interesting, when I legend trip, I go out and I do something to try to spark the activity, right? Something that would seem to make sense. And I'm like, well, I can't do yard work, and I'm not a gypsy. So what we did when we went there was we read a kid's book. And we hadn't even planned to do that. We were just kind of going to go there and explore the cemetery as we were on our way to another legend trip we were doing that night. And we happened to stop off at a bookstore, and we got this little kid's book, which was part of the Guardians, what is it called? The Rise of the Guardians series. And it's all about how...
The Owls of Galoo kind of thing?
I can't remember the name of it, but I know that they made a movie out of it. But they have a series of books, and then some of them are kids' books and some are young adult books. But it's like the story of Santa Claus and the Easter Bunny, right,
yeah,
and Jack Frost and everything, yeah. And this story, which I had never even heard of before as part of it, talks about how the moon will come, and then there'll be a rider on the moon, and he'll take all the spirits of the little children and move them off into peace. Didn't even know that was the topic. My co-host at that time didn't know what was going on. She didn't know anything about this legend. And she sat there and she read the story to them. She read the entire book to them. And I'm filming the whole thing. And you can see this on our Facebook page. I'm filming the whole thing. And I swear that as the sun was setting, you could see these little darts of shadow running to the middle of the cemetery where she was reading this book. It was profound. And it was one of those things that I'm like, I am on camera saying, did you see that? Like, I've seen these shadows. Do you see that one? And she's just reading the whole time. And, the cemetery itself is actually filled with a ton of children. And so I like to think that at least for one night, like, we gave them a little bit of entertainment.
Huh. Wow.
So do they come across as actual orbs or like will-o'-the-wisps?
Well, I don't know the distinction that you're making within those two definitions. But they are in Coker. They are probably about the size of a softball, and they float up from the ground, and then they dance, much like the Tomoka Lights. They kind of just dance around there, and they dart behind the headstones, almost as if they're playing hide and seek. Now, the obvious thing to say is, well, if a baby is 1 year old, what's it doing, like, running around a cemetery, right? Like, and I firmly believe it's actually not the lot children. I think it's the children that the other children that are buried there who are older. However, and this is the essence of what I do, when you experience the paranormal, most people, they don't have a frame of reference for it. They don't have experience or the vocabulary even sometimes to describe what they're seeing. And so what they do is they fall back on stories that they've heard. And so this story is a really good example of they're seeing these lights. They can't explain them. Wait a minute. There are these 3 graves that don't belong to the family that the rest of the cemetery is. It must be them. And then a story develops around it that is similar or familiar, I should say.
Wow. Barbara?
Well, I was just, the skeptic in me comes out and says, well, what about the ground level there? And what's the water table like? And are you just getting swamp gas?
Yeah, maybe. I don't know. Doesn't matter to me. I'm a folklorist. No, and that's the honest to God truth. Once again, that goes back to what I was saying about investigating, is that as a folklorist, I could care less whether something is really happening or not, whether the ghost is real or not. It's all about the story that the people are telling and exploring that. But what I would say to that is, I'm not quite sure if swamp gas can explain the shadows that I was seeing kind of scurrying around the headstones going towards it. Can explain some of the lights. Can it explain the Tomoka lights? Can explain, yes. And I think the interesting thing is, I'm doing an entire chapter. I'm currently working on a book just about the Ocala National Forest, because there are just so many ridiculous stories coming from that in the surrounding area. And I'm doing an entire chapter on just ghost lights, just the stories of ghost lights that people have told me. And I have never, and Barbara, maybe you can correct me on this, I have never heard of swamp gas being consistent or as active and moving and seeming to have a personality, or being able to be repeated in a lab. And so it's always presented as this scientific explanation for why a paranormal thing can't happen, and it does happen in nature. And so it's not like it's a fake thing, and yet just because it can be used to explain away what people are seeing, I don't think it does. There's Old Faithful. There's geysers out there which will build up and then they explode. So you can have frequency to that sort of thing as well, where there is a buildup of gas, etc., and then it finally explodes. Now, personality, we anthropomorphize a lot of things. Definitely. So that's part of it too. So there's always the possibility that there's something else is real. Yeah. And I also, I wonder if people have experienced this and whether they have actually experienced it, or whether it's kind of a crossover to another story which exists maybe 3 miles away in another cemetery, which also has a very similar story, only this time it was 7 children who were poisoned, and it all died on the same day. I shouldn't say that. One survived for 2 days afterwards. And it's an almost identical story in terms of the way that the balls of light move and the idea of the hiding behind the headstones. And for me, I almost personally feel that someone had an experience there. And then they see these 3 graves that they can't explain, which I can now explain as of yesterday. And they associated it with the other story, and the 2 stories got mixed and matched. And as an investigator, that would infuriate me. But as a folklorist, I'm like, oh wow, look at the way these 2 stories in 2 different locations are totally dancing with each other.
Sure. Well, there's that fine line with mythology, and because a lot of it is based on an actual event. which is retold to explain something. In the old days, it would be what the gods did, but in this case, it could be what spirits are doing.
And that's the essence of writing the Haunted Love book, is that, on one hand, love and obsession and hate, which is the other side of love, are all the kind of emotions that would be primed to cause a ghost and be primed to make a location haunted, or someplace you would return to, or a reason for your return. And then on the other hand, love stories are, and especially some of the ones that make up the backstories of these hauntings, are the most familiar stories you've ever heard. And so when something happens and someone says, oh, you know what that is? They loved each other and they ended up committing suicide. You say, I can buy that. Yep, okay. I believe the haunting or especially the haunted legend, because that story makes sense to me. So I feel those two things are kind of working with each other in a lot of the stories in the book.
Sure. The name of the doctor, no, actually he was a radiologist. The guy that stole the body of the woman he was obsessed with.
In Key West?
In Key West.
Yes. I can't remember the name, but I know the story that you're talking about. That's just freaky.
Yeah, really freaky. But the question is I think she was entombed there, and he stole the body out of that, and kept going back constantly. And her father finally caught him. Why isn't that haunted, or is it? Well,
one reason why it's not haunted is because she's not there. That the headstone and I'm not sure if it's a crypt or a mausoleum is still there, but because of all that, they took her body and they moved it someplace else.
Right.
And the second answer to that might be there is so much activity in that cemetery that I'm not quite sure you could even separate the stories as to who exactly is haunting which location of that. But what happens is, and actually I would say the opposite of it, what happens is that I've heard that she is there, and I've heard that he's there even after death. He returns to the cemetery, and that's what people use to explain some of the ghosts they see in there.
Oh, okay.
And if you're ever talking about, a lot of the book has to do with disturbed graves. You know what I'm saying? Like, a lot of them have to do with disturbed temple mounds and sacred places to the Native Americans in different areas in Florida. But in essence, like, that cemetery, probably more than most cemeteries I can think of, has been disturbed so many times because it seems to be hit so often with with hurricanes, that they're constantly having to rebuild it and find where the bodies are. And last time I went there, it was just after Irma, and there were just piles of rubble, and they didn't even know where certain parts of headstones went with it. It was like, trying to create a puzzle without the picture on the box of where some of these graves might be and things that they found. So it's the essence of an American version of a disturbed cemetery.
Yeah. Well, in knowing some people in Key West, it seems to me that was sort of accepted. They have a different attitude than most people.
Yeah. It's like, funny because the same can be said about where the lighthouse is. If you ask anyone, there are 2 dead bodies on that in that area, or 200 dead bodies on that area. There are so many legends about people going there and dying. There's of course, the most famous of these legends is that during one of the huge hurricanes back in the 1830s, the lighthouse keeper lost all of her children in the hurricane, as they were all in there, and the lighthouse got destroyed. And they had also allowed some people to take cover there because it was the only structure still standing, and all those people died. And so their spirits are kind of left on that property, and they continue to walk that property. The children are heard crying sometimes. The people are seen on the benches, and of course, none of that is actually true. When most of the people, there were 1 or 2 that died, but most of the people actually survived when the lighthouse crashed. And so, but it's one of those things where people know that it crashed. It's part of their history. Everything is kind of loose there in terms of what is history and what is story. And they want it that way because it adds to kind of the artistic flavor of the location. And so that's how you get really great haunted stories, and in this case, love stories.
Yeah. Well, it must be interesting too to have to figure out in your research what was actual folklore handed down generation and what's made up for modern tourists.
You know, it's interesting because when I'm in front of an audience, like doing a live presentation, remember when you could actually speak in front of people before you had to wear a mask everywhere? When I would speak in front of an audience, what I discovered was that they absolutely loved when I would tell the story and then I would go, nope, but that's not what really happened. And I would tell them the real history and why the story that's the popular story couldn't possibly be true. And I would lay it all out, and the live audience would love it. And they would almost like be in the know, like, now we know it too. And it's interesting because I find that when people read these stories, they don't like that part as much. There's a portion of people who absolutely love that you have gone into the story and you've basically found that it's not true, but it's still kind of an interesting story and maybe some weird stuff is still happening. The live audience loves it. I almost feel like some of the people who read the books when I do that feel cheated, which is totally not my perspective.
Yeah, well, yeah. To know the truth, but you know, it's the expectation too. If you go into what's supposedly a haunted area, and you have the expectation that Joe the ghost is in the attic, and of course you're going to go to the attic and you're going to hear a little creak, and obviously it's Joe. Right.
And that's the flavor that you want, and that's the mood and the aura that you want to create, and you want to go up there and you want to hear that creak, and you want to hear. You want to get on your tape recorder anything that sounds like Joe, right? And how easy is it to get that EVP? And so, you know, you don't want to then sometimes hear that it's not true. And the interesting thing is that most of what I do when I then bring in the folklore and I say here's the folklore, and then here's the history. Most of the time when I do that, but that doesn't explain away why it's happening. All I'm doing is telling you that the story that they're telling is not necessarily true, but there's still some really weird stuff going on.
Yeah. Well, when you get stories like My Little Obsession, which is Robert the Doll.
By the way, I didn't tell you I am drinking from my Robert the Doll cup as we speak.
Ooh, you know, and he is a cute little doll. I'm sorry. But
okay.
I have to wonder what he looks like in mint condition, though.
There's photographs on the internet that can show you what the doll is supposedly like, and it was a doll that was made in Belgium, I believe. And it looks a lot better than he does now, but, you know, age.
Don't we all?
Yeah, no kidding. But, you know, there was a lot of, it's obsession. It's about a man who's in love with that doll that he's had since childhood. But there's, you know, all the stories now of him running around that little tower room that he had.
The artist's house, the attic of the artist's house.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and it's really interesting because for me, I love a good haunted. I wrote a whole book called Haunted Objects. Like I love a good haunted doll story. And when I wanted to fit that into haunted love, the angle of it really was like, as you were saying, the obsession, right? You know, and I mentioned the curse that may or may not be true. That, you know, the housekeeper who was having the affair, who then was fired, so she put a curse on the doll. But I think it's much more about his obsession. And what I found really interesting was not Robert, but people. Right? And people's obsession. You were telling me yourself that when you get a friend request from Robert the Doll, you know you have to take it, or else Robert's rules are in effect and something bad is going to happen to you. And to me,
Robert's rules of order.
I literally, when the first time I went to see him, I was watching the people more than I was watching Robert, because I wanted to see their reaction to it and this kind of weird. Glassy-eyed effect that he had on people. The very first time I saw Robert, I was in St. Pete, and I was at a paranormal conference. My friend had said, I had just moved down here, and he said, hey, I'm going to be down there. I'm going to be selling some books. Do you want to come hang out with me? I'll get you in free. You can sell some of your books. And I was like, yeah, sure. And I had no idea who Robert was And I'm sitting there, and people kept all day asking me to come over and take pictures of them with this doll, right? And I had no idea what it was, right? But I'm not kidding about this. As the day went on, they go, "Hey, take a picture," and then they would giggle and they would say, "Okay, now ask to take the picture and take the picture." And I'm like, "What is going on here?" And at the end of the day, I kid you not, they took Robert out of his case.
Oh my God!
They held him up Simba style, right?
Mm-hmm.
And they marched him around the hall and out the door. And that was the first time, I think the only time Robert in his entire life had left the keys, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know what to make of this, but the person who organized that conference was supposed to originally write Picture Yourself Ghost Hunting, and after that some really weird things happened and he had to back out, and I stepped in, right?
Of course.
If you go to see Robert, one of the coolest things is the fact that there are page after page after page after page of letters hung up from people talking about bad things that happened to them after they went and saw Robert, and they weren't polite enough and they didn't do things. And now I have been to two I have loved two women in my life. One is the wife of my children. The other is my old co-host of Tripping on Legends, both of whom, one of which we went to go see Robert on our 10th anniversary, which was great. Because I had done research, I was able to write off the entire trip of our 10-year anniversary. We got divorced 2 years later. Now, with my co-host, we went down there for a completely unrelated reason. We were like, we have some time. We're right here. Let's see if we can get into the artist's house. And we were the first people to go into the attic since Robert had taken it out, other than the people who owned the house. And we were up in the attic, and there's no mystique to it. It's just an attic. Yeah, we broke up 3 months later.
You see, that now I don't have a fear of Robert. I want to go to Key West, and I want him to sit on my lap, and so I can talk to him. And I want somebody there with a full spectrum camera who can document if there's any change in it.
Yeah, I don't have a fear of Robert either. I just get lonely sometimes now.
It's all because you didn't ask when you took the first photograph.
I asked everything. Yeah, exactly. Some person in St. Pete back in 2007 cursed me.
Wow.
But you see, when Robert says, follow this person on Facebook, and then the kicker was Robert started following me on Facebook. I didn't send him a request. He just started following me on Facebook. So,
are you friends, or he's just following you?
No, we're friends. Yeah, I
so
followed him too.
You had to approve it. You invited him in, so you only have yourself to blame.
Yep. But
Wow.
I'll introduce him to Annabelle, and they can go out on a date.
Oh my word! Yeah, and I actually think that Robert's really mad at that, because he used to be the big haunted doll in town, and now she's taken all of his kind of his punch. So.
Yeah, but Annabelle's not in Florida.
No.
Yeah, but when you ask people what's the best haunted doll, they used to say Robert, and now they jump out with Annabelle. But of course, they identify her as the wrong doll. But still, the legend of Annabelle has taken over the legend of Robert, and I don't think that he likes it one bit.
Wow. So now, all the stories that you have on your Tripping Legends page, have you been to those places and researched them and wrote them up?
Yeah. The only ones that are on there that I haven't been to are the ones that I plan to be to. For example, I've never been to the Bellamy Bridge, which is one place that I really wanted to go. We were supposed to go last summer, and we ended up not being able to do it. And then my children and I were supposed to go on spring break, and we had to reduce it to day trips. And the Panhandle is about, that's a little bit outside of Tallahassee, so that's about a 12-hour drive for me.
It is,
But pretty much, I don't talk about a place unless I've been there. And unless it's an open-ended episode. Like we have one, because I'm writing this book and because of travel conditions, I've really been confined to the house for the last 2 months, most weekends, trying to get this done and working on things, and then going to the Ocala But there's this really great Panhandle story that I want to follow up on in this place called Coon Hill Cemetery. And so that's probably the only one, that and the Bellarmine Bridge, that are out there that I haven't been able to actually get to. It's usually, I know I'm going to be able to get to some place, and therefore I write about it so they can then have like the follow-up to it.
Well, I guess a lot of people has heard about this one called the Bunny Man Bridge.
Mm-hmm.
Where's that located, and what's the story behind the Bunny Man?
Well, the Bunny Man Bridge is in Texas. It's not in Florida.
I knew it wasn't down there, but I didn't know where it was. Yeah.
I'm pretty sure it's in Texas if I'm getting it right. I might be thinking instead of what the other bridge, the Goat Man Bridge, I think is in Texas. I think the Bunny Man Bridge is in West Virginia, and it is just an extremely haunted place. See, one of the other things that I like to do is when I'm talking about one location that's here in Florida, I'll then bring in other locations, and my children. This is, once again, we were set to go to different places, and so we set out, okay, so where do we want to go? What investigations or what legend trips do we want to do? And one of them was they wanted to go to the Bunny Man Bridge because we were planning on going like up and visiting Mothman. And so Bunny Man Bridge I had heard about years before. And, you know, one of the stories has to do with there was an escaped convict, and he survived by eating bunnies. Him and another man escaped from either an insane asylum or a jail, depending on which version of the story you go with, and they survived in the woods by eating these rabbits. And so there would be all these dead bunnies on the side and in the woods and at this bridge location, until finally one of them turned on the other, and they ended up killing their partner and hanging him from that bridge. And it said that if you go at a certain time, and of course the time changes depending on the generation. The generations now say it's 3 a.m. as opposed to midnight because, you know, the new generation is obsessed with 3 a.m. If you go there, you will actually see the person hanging, and you cannot walk from one end of the bridge to the other underneath without going insane. You will start to hear all the people who have died there, because then it extends to anything bad that happens in that area. The Bunny Man did it, right? So if you can make it all the way through, when you get home, the Bunny Man is going to kill you anyway. And so, of course, it's one of those great legend trips that people try to do, is they go to Bunny Man Bridge, they try to walk the entire way, they try to close their eyes or turn their lights on to get a flash of the man that's hanging there. And it really is one of those things that drives the locals crazy and the police crazy. But I don't know many people who have either died there or gone insane afterwards.
And if you die after you go insane, how do they know they went insane?
Well, maybe they do wacky stuff before then, right? I mean, of course, that's always the trick of these legends, is that, you know, they say it's like in Pirates of the Caribbean. He's like, if all the people died, then how'd the story get out? You know, I was
just about to reference that. Yeah.
Right. You know, it's kind of like, I do another story we can get a little more in depth with if you want afterwards, after the break. But part of the legend involves a pirate who kidnaps a woman, and it's said that the woman then essentially crashes the ship, and all the people that are on the ship dying. And she does a very specific thing in terms of she finds one of those things that digs graves, or like punches through metal, and she punches metal into it, and so it's sinking and everyone dies. And I'm like, well, then how do they know that she did that? How do they know how she escaped from her stateroom to get down to the basement? But that legend still persists.
Sure. Wow.
Of course. Why don't we take a break and come back and
you want to take a break first? Okay,
yeah.
We can do that. We can go ahead and take a
Before
break.
Skype kicks me up again.
It'll probably be about 5-6 minutes, something like that. So remember, you won't hear anything, but your mic will be live. And I hope everybody is enjoying the show. I've got another whole page and a half of places to talk about, and so we'll get to those when we come back. So, Jeff, you want to take us out? Barbara?
Jeff? I guess he got kicked off. Well, folks, you're listening to the... Jeff, you back? Nope.
Nope.
Robert got him. Okay, folks, you're listening to the Paranormal View here on the ParaX Radio Network with our special guest tonight, Christopher Balzano, author of his latest book, anyway, at least, is Haunted Florida Love Stories. And we will be right back after a few messages.
Whether you're listening at home, at work, or anywhere, thanks for making ParaX part of your day. Your source for everything paranormal, ParaX.
And welcome back, everybody, right here to the Paranormal View on the ParaX Radio Network. I want to thank everyone for being with us tonight, those listening here in the chat room and those listening from around the world. I guess we got Barbara back.
I'm here.
And Jeff, are you back?
Yeah, Skype decided to completely reboot itself and reinstall itself. I'm like,
yeah.
oh, nice timing. Yes,
I did mine before I got on. So
yeah, but it just opened earlier. It didn't say, oh, you got to. Usually it'll do that when I open it, but
yeah,
just decided now is a good time.
Well, I want to welcome back Christopher Balzano.
Maybe.
Hello, I'm back.
Okay. Great.
I never left you.
You never left. I didn't know if you was in one of them graveyards or something looking. So.
Well, you brought up, and it's interesting because the other thing I really love is pirate stories.
Mm-hmm.
And there really aren't a lot of pirate love stories.
You know, I'm excited, and then I'll tell you the story. But I'm excited because there's a really great investigator down here, a researcher, I should say, down here, who's decided to give. He's given it up. He doesn't want to do this anymore, and he was really happy with how I had treated his story, and how I had actually credited him in my book and sent him a free copy as a thank you of it. And he said, I want to give you all of this research that I have on pirate legends all up and down the West Coast, the Gulf Coast, which is where I am. And I cannot wait to open up that file. And he said, all I've got to do is fix my hard drive, because then I was like, just send it to me. Send me the whole computer. I will pay for it. And I'll do whatever it takes to get this information. So I'm just waiting to see how that plays out, because, we don't generally tend to think of pirates and romance, and the story is really not that romantic. So it's in Bradenton, Florida. There's this area of the Manatee River which for years was known to sing. And the original story that people would tell about it has to do with the two tribes that were essentially split, the Timucua and the Calusa, by this river. And it's a typical story that you would think of: two separate tribes. One is the son of the Timucua chief. The other is the daughter of the Calusa, and they would meet in the middle of the Manatee River because they weren't allowed to share their love. But the river was kind of neutral territory. And they fell in love, and he said to her, I want to take you away. And she said, I'm not sure I can, not that I don't love you, but if you ever drink from the spring that's on my side of the water, it says that you will never find peace in any other place. And so I don't know if I can do it. But their love was so strong that they decided to go against all of that. And he proposed, and she accepted, and the river started to sing. And he said, he was all scared, and she said, no, don't worry. That's the voices of my people, and they are telling me, they're telling us that they approve of this marriage. And what it actually was the story goes that there was a tribe there back in the day or an early part of the Calusa that were going to be wiped out. And rather than surrendering, or rather than risking war, they all decided to commit suicide in the water at the same time. And they started to sing this song, and then they just kind of jumped into water as they were singing this song. And to this day, you can hear the sound of those people continuing to sing. Now, this is actually a good, most of the stories like this don't end well. This ends up well in that they are married till the end of their days. Eventually, the Calusa chief decides to open the tribe up and unite them, and which is the reason why there are no Timucua anymore, and they live happily ever after. And so that's one story that exists in that area. But the more I dug into why this singing happens, and now the singing is completely probably a natural physical reaction that's happening in the water, right? If you think of it in terms of my niece, who is going for her PhD in chemistry, compared it to essentially dropping Alka-Seltzer into a thing of water, and how there's a physical reaction and you hear sound. That's
Right.
probably what explains what this singing is in that area. And yet they found the need to actually steal a legend that's very popular on the Mississippi River and attach it to this. But then they tell this other one because there's something else weird that happens in that location. So Miguel Pascal, who is known as the Butcher, was being chased by this commandant further up north. And he decided to do a little intel on this guy. And in doing it, he discovered his daughter, who he absolutely fell in love with. And as most people who are in love do, he kidnapped her. And he snuck her onto the boat. And he decided that you will not leave until you fall in love with me, and then maybe I'll let you be around the ship, but you're going to be my stateroom until then. And obviously, as most people do when they're kidnapped, she was depressed by this. And to make her feel better, he took the strings of a harp and he put them all in the windows of the stateroom so that whenever the wind blew, there would be this beautiful music, and eventually she'll fall in love with him because she'll be hearing this beautiful music all of the time. Oddly enough, that didn't work, and she still didn't like him. And when he went off to conduct another raid, she snuck down, she punctured holes in the hull of the ship, and then set the armory on fire. And so the whole thing blew up. Everyone there died, and they sunk to the bottom of the Manatee River. And because it had burnt up before, that's why there are no remains that people ever find of it, which of course is ridiculous, right? But people say that on certain nights, not only can you still hear that singing, but you can actually see the giant ship rising from the water itself. And we went there one night, and we were more focused on the Native American legend. And so we went there and we recited a poem that was inspired by this story. And just as we were finishing the poem, once again, I've got this video up on both the YouTube and the Facebook page. There began in the middle of that Manatee River, these weird waves started to happen. The kind of waves that happen, that kind of like concussion, Jurassic Park kind of waves, like when something is coming up out of the water. And we saw this dark object come out of the water, and then before it reached the top, go back under. And so I can't tell you if that was actually the Butcher's ship and the beautiful maiden who didn't like the music being played on the harp strings on her windows, but it definitely was something that we experienced.
Well, considering he dismantled the harp, she probably went to the strings and says, well, now you're too small to be a harp. And they just said, you calling me a liar?
You were waiting for that joke for like 5 years. You even put on a sticky note next to your computer, be like, when he finishes rambling on about whatever he's rambling on about, I'm throwing this joke out there.
And this is the
I was also pointing out, it's not like the singing was Hertz frequencies being on the water, it's just waves.
Oh, follow-up joke.
What'd you say, Barbara?
Yeah.
Okay, don't forget to tip your waiters.
Try the meal.
Barbara,
and it's the Manatee River?
Yes, in Bradenton, Florida. And
So
it's
one would
a
assume
really
there are-
popular story.
Yeah. One would assume there are manatees in the river?
There are no manatees in that part of the river anymore because it's actually fairly built up now.
Okay. But back then there would have been manatees.
There definitely would have been, yeah.
Okay.
there are manatees up in where Tomoka is. in the river.
Are
right
there
there.
really?
Yeah, it sure is.
I didn't know how many there were on the East Coast.
Well, that's they come in, I'm sure, out of the Cape River there, and
Right.
Cape Fear River, or not Cape Fear, but out of the waterway. But anyway, they do have a enclosed area. It's not enclosed, but they do feed them and stuff in that area right there.
Yeah, and and I get where you're hitting at, Barbara. Trust me, I get what you're saying. Things coming out of the water, and I think manatees are mistaken by a lot of people who are newcomers to Florida for other things. And of course, there's the whole. We were talking about the Fountain of Youth, the whole idea of manatees being mermaids and things like that. So I definitely get how animals can be mistaken for a lot of these legends. Yeah.
Now, you.
But boy, I cannot wait for the pirate book. I hope you do it.
Hope.
Yeah.
Well, that's just another show. So.
Of course, you want to buy a legit version, not a pirate copy. So
Yeah, not a pirated copy. Yeah.
But it is funny how few ghostly legends are attached to pirates that I've been able to track down and been able to, other than like a few, random words on the internet, been able to see like a legitimate a pirate legend that I could actually go and explore in Legend Trip.
There are very few. And it's mostly about guarding treasure.
Right.
A buried treasure somewhere, and that's pretty much it.
Because they always said the legends were that if you were on treasure burying detail, it's sort of like a one-way trip. I would like maybe I'll skip this one, Captain. I'm just saying.
Well, it is interesting that the follow-up to that story is that I'm not sure how long he grieved for. But a few years later, there was a mysterious ship that sailed down into the Manatee River, used explosives right near the location of where the singing part is, and is said to have escaped with, the butcher's treasure. So,
Wow.
So good for him.
Yeah.
If you found something, yes. Now, have you been up to Wilmington, North Carolina?
I don't think I've been up to Wilmington. We went to the Piedmonts. Is Wilmington near the Piedmonts?
No, Wilmington is on the coast, down by toward Carolina Beach, or Carolina Beach just south of that. But anyway, there's a house that used to be the Chamber of Commerce building in Wilmington, and it's the old Price Goss house. The house is supposed to be haunted. The hill there where it sets on was a place called Hangman's Knob or something like that, where they hung all the criminals of the early days in Wilmington. My mom, I hadn't been living in Wilmington maybe 6-7 months, something like that. And she sent me this magazine. It's a Fate magazine. And it's about the Price Goss house. It had a picture of a woman a ghost coming down the staircase. And so my mom wanted me to go there and, just talk to them and get information. I went down and talked to the people, and they told me some of the things, that they witnessed or things that happened in the house. One was the woman said every now and then the back door will just open up and it stays locked all the time. She said that's happened more than one occasion. The story that's in the Fate magazine has articles. It talks about if you look on the outside, there's a cemetery around beside the house. If you look up at the window on the outside, you can see a window. If you go on the inside, there's not a window. So different things like that. Anyway, after we got done doing that, my wife was working for this lady, taking care of her mother during the day while this woman worked. And she told that woman, about the story of this. And the woman said, wait just a minute. And she went in her bedroom and she come out with an 8x10 glossy picture of that ghost coming down the staircase, the original picture.
Oh, wow.
And here's the funny thing. she said it was real. She used to date the guy who took the picture.
Oh, my word.
Now, how much of a coincidence is this and my wife
Yeah.
be working for? I mean, it's not anything
Under my
doing
lottery
with the
ticket.
paranormal, but it's a sure coincidence of some sort.
Well, what we call that, and this is kind of, in a lot of ways, the essence of legend tripping versus investigating, right? And we call it #follow the signs. And when the signs are pointing you some way, especially when you become open to receiving them, you kind of have to go with it, right? And it leads you to places that you aren't quite sure. So I'll give you a great example with the Manatee River story. We were having this really weird thing with birds. And so I had found 2 dead birds in my yard. At the same time, my co-host was driving down the road, and she thought she had hit a bird, and so she decided to go look out. And she said there were no feathers, there was nothing that didn't seem that had been hit, and she was kind of it disturbed her, and she was worrying about it. And then the next day, a cardinal appeared right in her yard. And for her section of Florida, cardinals are kind of rare. I mean, they're rare in general, but it's supposed to be the cardinals is kind of this universal sign of the afterlife. And so she decided to type in some keywords about that. And so keep in mind, she's talking about birds. So it was like bird omen or something like that. And the first thing that came up after you got past like the book of, the buying a book of what omens mean and stuff like that, the first thing it had to do with an actual website that wasn't selling something was an article about the Singing River. And it was literally the week that we were planning on going. And it was an interview with a person who had written an entire series of novels, not nonfiction, but novels based around Native American legends that her grandmother had told her. And one of the legends up in Mississippi was this story of the Singing River and this idea of the tribe committing suicide. Essentially, the week before we went there, all of these different signs pointed her to this website, which actually explained the legend that we were just about to look at, which was completely unrelated. So I always say #follow the signs.
Follow the signs.
Yeah,
Follow the signs.
when you talk about legend tripping, and I think it's interesting to do that. However, if you're trying to explore, say, something like the Bridgewater Triangle, which could be really kind of dangerous, right?
Oh yeah, and the majority of, I don't think I've ever. People always want to ask me, what is the scariest place you've ever been? And I'm like, I don't get scared at these places, even though I've had some really odd and spooky things happen. I generally don't tend to get scared, except for when I'm in a location because of the people, right? Because of what actually might be going on there. And so
Yeah, the live people.
It's funny that I noticed someone in your chat room mentioned they wouldn't want to go to Bunnyman Bridge because they wouldn't want to see the bunny from The Shining. And what actually happens is people go out to the Bunnyman Bridge dressed in these really creepy bunny costumes and scare people, or even physically attack them. So when you're talking about like the Bridgewater Triangle, a place like the Assonet Ledge, I've never gone there and had something weird and spooky not happen. And yet every time I go there, or anywhere in the Freetown State Forest especially, I'm acutely aware that there's a criminal element where I am. And that I need to be more aware of that than I am aware of ghosts. And the odd thing is that we've never been attacked. As both an investigator and a legend tripper, I've never had anything bad happen. My co-host used to always carry a weapon. And every time that the outside world has interfered, it's either been someone who has helped us and actually led to an understanding of the story, or cops. And every time it's been a cop, we've gotten more information from a cop about the legend than most other people that we've spoken to in the town. So it is dangerous, but the number one thing is always to be safe. And so we don't go to places that are going to be dangerous, especially at night. And I rarely go someplace at night that I haven't been during the day, so I at least know the terrain.
Good thinking. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think you need to do that as well. Like we were following up on this story called Julia, and it's this haunting and this really great roadside legend that takes place in this town known as Lady Lake. And the story involves the woods, right? So not only do you see this woman who is either wearing white or glowing white, but she is accompanied by these absolutely horrific screams and cries for daddy, for coming from the forest and coming from the woods. And it being out there, you feel that, right? When you're in there, you're like, oh my word, like something really, really horrible could happen here. And you're wondering what this might be. And you can imagine people's imaginations going crazy over different animals that might be in these woods at night. But then I went there during the day, and it is completely residential. You just can't see it because all the houses are hidden behind these trees. And so what seems like it's a thick forest is only a first layer of forest and then someone's front yard. And so, that helped me gain perspective not only on how dangerous it might be at night or how we should actually go through the legend trip, but by being there during the day, I was able to get some understanding of how people might get confused there, because you go from a commercial setting or commercial properties to what seems as if it's wood. So yeah, you would think that people are going to see weird things out here, and in actuality, it's all houses.
Wow.
So I know you basically are doing legends and ghosts, etc. But of course, if you're out traveling at night in some of these areas, what about the UFO activity? Do you see any of that?
It's really hard to. I've never encountered what I consider to be a UFO, but that's a really hard sell, because I think a lot of UFO legend and ghost legend coincide with each other, and I think a lot of it has to do with the filter that people are viewing these through, and what they know, and really oftentimes the first people they contact about it. And I was just mentioning the Assonet Ledge. So the Assonet Ledge, depending on who you ask, either has the highest reports of ghost lights in the world, and people have seen what looks like these glowing lights coming up from the water. And it's a site where there have not only been a lot of bodies dumped, because it's the entire state forest is a haven for crimes happening in Boston and Providence, Rhode Island, and Brockton, Massachusetts, these areas of crime. And then in 45 minutes, they can be in the middle of nowhere in this forest, and they dump bodies in this water. And there have been a whole bunch of suicides of people jumping off this cliff. So they see these lights, they see them under the water, they see them coming to the surface, right? And then other people have seen those same lights at the Assonet Ledge in the woods. And let's do the same thing. Oh, those are the people that are in the water, the people that have been married. They tell the same story. But if you ask other people who have spotted them, they'll tell you that it's the highest hit point or UFO sightings, because they're interpreting those same ghost lights as UFOs. So I don't think that I've ever experienced something that was dramatic or high enough in the sky for me to think of it as a UFO, nor have I ever personally had like an abduction type situation. But, oftentimes I use that as context. So like I was talking about the Ocala Woods. As soon as I opened up that I was writing about that, people wanted to tell me their skunk ape stories, and they wanted to tell me their phantom witches in the woods stories, and they wanted to tell me their alien stories, and so I find that when I'm legend tripping, or even when I'm just exploring a legend, I need those kind of things, if they're being said in the same area, as context, because it helps me to understand that people in this area are having weird things going on. So never had an experience myself, but I definitely think that most of these areas most of them have the trifecta of cryptids, aliens, and ghostly sightings as well.
You're bringing up a really good point about filters and how people are perceiving things these days. And of course, now the plethora of ghost sighting shows that are on television, there's a few cryptid shows and a few UFO shows now. How do you think, is it slanting or changing the perceptions that people have of these experiences?
100%. And I think that's how these communities have grown, right? Like you were talking about the Bridgewater Triangle. The reason why I was able to become such an important researcher into that topic was because I was one of the first people on the internet and one of the first people to have a website that was dedicated just to Massachusetts back in the day. Mm-hmm. And so as I would publish stories that I would hear, many of them happened in the Bridgewater Triangle, and then people would go online searching because they were having experiences, and I was the site that they would find. And so I think that it all depends on where those people are coming from. I think that the way that we're presenting it approaches it, right? And you see these cycles of things coming through. And so one of the big things I've experienced are these shadow men and shadow men with hats, right? And for years, I would have an occasional shadow man sighting, usually associated with another haunting. And so another haunting would be going on, and then people would also see a shadow man. And then all of a sudden, it became really popular for these shadow men to have hats. And all of a sudden, then all the sightings changed. And now instead of just shadow men, I was getting all of these reports of this activity was going on, this activity going on. And then there seemed to be a man who was made of, thick blackness, or he looked like a shadow, or he looked like black mist, and he was wearing a hat. To the point that the interesting thing is, is it a tulpa? Like, do we create these things? Are they thought forms? Because a whole bunch of people start talking about them. Is it more likely that we're going to see that kind of sighting? Or is it a matter of, cognitive bias, or what they call, the punch buggy syndrome? When someone mentions, a Volkswagen Bug, then all of a sudden the next day you see Volkswagen Bugs all over the place. They were there the whole time, but now that you're thinking about it, you start to see them all the time. So it's really interesting. I think that the media and the internet community have a huge impact on the way that people perceive, but then also experience the paranormal.
Interesting.
So but it's also interesting that you can start that snowball effect, where if everybody starts reporting and putting men with hat photos on their websites, then it becomes everything men with hats.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
Now, I wish it became Men Without Hats, because I love that band. Little safety dance joke there for you. Well, and then now, so, maybe we make them ourselves because we're thinking of them, right? Now, let's get really creepy with it, because I fully believe that the majority of experiences people have, and I'm not talking about home hauntings here, I'm talking more about whether it's in famously haunted places or the ghostly legends that I explore. I think oftentimes what is there is not what the ghost actually is, and that for some reason they're able to transform into what they present to us, or they can have some control over what's presented to us. Therefore, if a lot of people are talking about people with hats and that's what's getting the attention, can the ghost itself make itself a shadow man with a hat just because it knows that's what people are going to be looking for and that's what the hip thing is? Try turning that question around in your head a few times and see if you can sleep tonight.
Well, and Jeff brings up a joke constantly, but it's everybody dies, and your clothes don't die with you.
Right.
So why are all the ghosts dressed?
Exactly.
And can they put on different clothes when they haunt? Probably. Who knows?
Yeah, and it's when I was in the Bridgewater Triangle and I was investigating, I went out there with Mike Markowitz, who's known as EVP Mike, and there was this extremely haunted house. It's the Samuel West house. It's featured in Ghosts of the Bridgewater Triangle, one of my books. And we set up these crazy microphones that he uses. Then we went out and we talked to the homeowner. This was the third time I had been there. Every time something, big had happened while I was there. We went out there. We were sitting by the fire, just talking, giving it just an hour. And when we got back, not only did we have EVPs, but we also had EVPs where the voices seemed to be talking to each other. And one of the little snippets of conversation we had was a little kid talking, and then an older person saying, like, "Shh, quiet, they're recording us."
Whoa.
Which makes the argument that the people on the other side, whatever it might be, have an understanding of us trying to interpret them, or us trying to experience them, or us trying to get evidence of them. And if that's the case, like, you can also imagine that they probably have some kind of influence on, what they wear or the nature of their haunting. Maybe.
Yeah, I think they can present themselves to look the way they look, the things that they wore and stuff like that.
Or the way that they perceived themselves. You know what I'm saying? They're trapped in
right.
their own understanding of their more immortality.
Right.
And then you
Kind
get
of a matrix sort of thing where it's your self-perception.
Yeah,
So
I mean,
if you want to look different, you can.
There's a lot of horrific deaths that have happened, and everyone dies, just as Jeff said. And when I think of the number one spark of ghostly activity, it has to be the Civil War, right? There are, and it's true that it's the number one, the only war other than the Revolutionary War and the War of 1812 that have been fought in our soil, right? On our soil,
Right.
But there's also this understanding that the Civil War happens at the time where not only do we have a rise of spiritualism, but we have the rise of this idea, which is I can't remember the Latin of it, but it translates into a good death, and that many of the people in America at that time had this understanding of death having to be a certain way. You had to be home. You had to be surrounded by your family. You had to give off some piece of advice at the end. And this belief was so strong in the people that were living at that time that enemies, when they found someone dying, were known to search the bodies of the soldier who was dying, not for weapons and all that stuff, but for pictures of their loved ones, because people carried those pictures so that if they died in war, they would actually put these pictures around them, so it would be almost like simulating that they were surrounded by the people that they loved, or items from the people. And so they stood as avatars, if you will, of the people who should have been there. And a lot of people didn't get that kind of death, right? Not only did they not get that kind of death, it was really the first big war where you could lose your leg and still survive, and you could lose your arm and it would be amputated and you would survive on. And so there was this disconnect between the physical body and the spiritual body. And so it makes sense that those kind of things and not dying the right way and not being whole would impact people to the point that they would think that they were cursed to walk the earth. They would be more likely to be a ghost because their perception was they hadn't done what they were supposed to do.
Would you perceive them, though, as a ghost with only one arm, or would he actually project himself as a whole body?
I would say it would as he perceived himself. Like, I've gotten reports of amputee ghosts as well as whole ghosts, and then when you go and you do the research, you find out, oh, actually he had lost a leg in the war, or he actually didn't have a hand, or he didn't have, his eye had been poked out, he had lost his eye. This is not just Civil War stuff, but I'm talking just in general. And yet when you see the ghost is fully formed, and so you have to wonder whether it's how the spirit themselves, if this is possible, perceives themselves as what they project as their ghost.
Right. That's the way that I would look at it.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So I am going to be the handsomest ghost in the history of the world. I'm going to be 6'3". all that crazy back hair gone.
Now, I guess you went to a couple places in North Carolina. Did you go to the Devil's Tramping Ground in Raleigh?
Oh, yeah, we went to the Devil's Tramping Ground. And it was, of the things that we had done that week, what we were doing is we were trying to make our way to Indiana. Because I know no one in the world is there on their bucket list to go to Indiana. But I had been researching this cryptid known as a Pukwudgie for years. And other than Massachusetts, the other primary spot for this was in Indiana. So we wanted to get there. I wanted to get to this one place in Indiana. And so we decided to go up the coast, and we researched. We actually have a few episodes where we debate where we're going to go. We decided to go to this place called the Piedmont. And of the places that we were looking at, one of the most interesting ones to me was the Devil's Trampling Ground, which is said to be, and this is where you were talking about Barbara Perception, the most popular story, and it's actually on Devil's Trampling Ground Road, is that the devil himself landed on Earth. And he decided he was going to torture the people of North Carolina, and he started to walk around in a circle as he was thinking about what to do. And as he began to walk in this circle, he killed whatever might be able to live in there. And so if you go to this area, there's a perfect circle, and nothing ever grows there. And it's said that if you put anything in the circle, the devil will immediately throw it out. And people have seen this evil dark figure still walking in circles. Now, other people have said it's where a UFO landed, and the UFO, tainted the ground, and that's why it will never grow. And then other people have said, no, it was a coven of witches who would make human sacrifices, and so the human sacrifices tainted this soil. And we went there. And there's stuff that grows in the middle, right? It now has grass. And I've seen pictures of it being perfectly clear. And I do feel that, there was something weird going on just naturally with the soil. And when we went there, the middle was covered with beer bottles and a chair and all of this other stuff where people had at least tried to get it to things to throw out. Although I'm pretty sure, because we went back there at night, remember we scouted it during the day, went back at night, and people were down there like partying and drinking. We're like, this is probably not a good spot for us. Right. But when we went there during the day, we pulled in, we did kind of a lap just to kind of check it out. And then we set up a stationary camera, and then we just kind of walked around for a bit. And what I was noticing in the woods were a lot of cult remnants around this devil's tree, which usually generally happens when some place is known to be really haunted, especially when it gets a nickname like the Devil's Anything, right? And coming from having written Dark Woods, where the subtitle of that book is Cults, Crime, and the Paranormal, and having worked in juvenile detention facilities where we have to identify gang symbolism and cult activity and things like that, I was noticing different etchings on the trees, and I was noticing these little formations and these little things which I would consider altars. And it was nothing conclusive, and it was just like, oh wow, this is a really creepy place. We made a cross actually out of wood, and we put it in the middle of the circle, and we decided to go back the next day and see if it was still there, and it was still there. But then
so much for the story.
So much for the story, right?
Double liked it.
So then, afterwards, after we got home, I was and it was a long trip. We went to a lot of places. It was really cool. Like one of those things you're just like, why? The trip itself changed my life, especially when I actually got to Indiana. And when we got back, I just had that stationary camera on, and this is probably, at least on the Tripping on Legends videos, this is probably the most popular video that we have. It's called Clang and Fly. You're watching it, and then about 20 minutes into the video, you just hear clank, and something flies across the screen as if someone had just kicked a can. And it's, it's clear as day that it's something. Now, is it a bird? Is it all these things kind of happen simultaneously. How many coincidences does it take? But you clearly hear metal being hit, and then something that looks like metal flies across the screen. And of course, we weren't in the circle at the time. We were exploring in the woods and some of these other things. But to this day, it remains like a really creepy, and to me, it's so easy to say that that's not evidence. That's what we do as a cynical paranormal community. And yet, okay, here's a story. Here's something that happened. What happened coincides with the story that's being told there. You just kind of have to scratch your head and wonder what it was.
Right. And it didn't pick up anybody around either. Just
Oh, there was no one around. We were there by ourselves. Yeah, and if you've ever been there, I mean, you have to drive down probably about half a mile, 3/4 of a mile to get to where the Devil's Tramping Ground is. So unless randomly there are people in the woods, which that's fine. You know, I can say that there would be people in the woods. I mean, but we're talking, we weren't there on like a Tuesday at like 10 o'clock in the afternoon. So it's not like 10 o'clock in the morning. So it's not as if it was prime, let's go freak people out time, you know?
Right. But I knew about the story. I never did go there to research anything. Of course, I wasn't into the paranormal when I was living there. I didn't get started until 2008, and I'd already left North Carolina by then. So.
And you know, the story is popular enough that not only is it told and retold, like I said, the road is called Devil Trampling Ground Road. The story is popular, and it's not as if it's like there's then really good Tomoki hot sauce in the middle of it, so it's an attraction, right? Like, there's no reason for it to be hailed and remembered and honored in the way that it is, except for the fact that people have had weird experiences there. So they're not profiting off of acknowledging this legend. They just have to because things are really happening there.
Wow. More time just running right on by. Now, I know you said you went to Indiana to look up about Pukwudgies. So
yeah,
let's talk about Pukwudgies. What are they, and what'd you find?
Sure. So Pukwudgies are essentially trolls. And when I was researching the Freetown State Forest in the Bridgewater Triangle, people kept telling me the same reports. I got it from 3 different people. All 3 were walking in a wooded area or like surrounding, like at the edge of the woods, and they accidentally came across what to them looked like a little goblin or like a little troll, about 3 feet high, slightly elongated nose. 2 of them, there was no clothes being worn that they could see, but the belly seemed to like be hanging over their waistline. And they were completely freaked out by this. Some of people have reported them being hairy. These people all reported it being more skin and just like a lot of hair on top. And the creature then disappeared. Like something would happen, they'd look back and it would be gone. And in every single one of these reports, including a 4th report in an area near the Bridgewater Triangle, this one was wearing a hat though. In all those reports, a few nights later, that same creature came back to visit them, right? And 2 of them were in their bedrooms of people. Like they woke up to find this Pukwudgie. One of them, the Pukwudgie, was actually physically in the room. And one of them, the Pukwudgie, was outside looking into the window. And they were on the 2nd floor. And the 3rd one, the person was in a dark parking lot waiting for someone to get out of work. Like he was just kind of waiting for his girlfriend to get out of work, so he went to kind of hang out for a little bit in this park near the Freetown State Forest. All 3 of them described it basically as these creatures were saying, "We know where you live. Like we can get to you. Stay out of the woods." All of them were completely moved and creeped out and frightened by their experience. And they were all looking to me to explain it. And I'm like, I haven't the slightest idea what that is. And I dug pretty deep into research and books. And I found this one line in a book that was, or this one paragraph in a book that was talking about this famous cryptid called the Dover Demon. And it's by Joe Citro. It's called Passing Strange. And in that paragraph, it essentially was like, the Dover Demon is not a Pukwudgie. And he said, the Pukwudgies are a native Wampanoag legend, blah, blah, and just a little bit. And I was like, well, what are they? And I hit the internet, and there was nothing on the internet. Literally no hits on the internet other than a book that was called The Good Giant and the Bad Pukwudgie. So I immediately bought that book. I immediately went to the back of the book, and the writer says, these are based on these stories that you find in the Narrow Land. Boom, went out and got the Narrow Land. And I started to read more and more about these Pukwudgies, who essentially, for a very long time for the Wampanoag, were just these trickster spirits. They would just pull these little practical jokes. The creator god goes on a vacation. He's essentially cheating on his wife, and he runs off to the sea to be with this woman. And while he's gone, the Pukwudgies turn from being cute and cuddly and pulling out these little tricks to starting to burn the Wampanoags village, to kidnap their children, to lead people into the woods by these things called Taipaiwunkas, which we've already discussed tonight as ghost lights and Will o' the Wisp, or Wisp of the Will. I always get wrong with which way I always mess up which way it is. Jeff, help me out here. Is it Will o' the Wisp or Wisp of the Will?
Will o' the Wisp.
Will o' the Wisp. Thank you. Yeah. You're like, now that I'm saying it, you're like, oh wait a minute, did I get it right? They call them Taipaiwunkas, and they're the souls of the Wampanoags that they've killed, and they use them to lure other people out. And this was like a big part of Wampanoag culture. And for years, they were kind of, everything that happened that was wrong, they would say it was the Pukwudgies. And so, every culture, I think, has a creature that's similar to this. And not only do they have a creature that's similar to this, they have different kinds. So in the first, 15 years of me doing Pukwudgie research, the one thing I couldn't wrap my mind around was the actions were very similar, but people were describing them differently. Fiona Broom, for example, described them as Grover on a bad day, even though they were red. So it was more like Elmo on a bad day. Or some people would describe them as, all the same physical traits, but they were completely covered in hair. And then other people would say they only had hair on the top of their head. And when I went to Indiana, I went to Mound State Park in Anderson, Indiana, which is the other big location and the only other book that really focuses on Pukwudgies. It comes from Anderson. And so I went to Mound State Park, and we just happened to be there on a day that one of the rangers who was visiting almost had her doctorate, and she was exploring like the mysticism surrounding the mounds, right? And the alignment of the different mounds in different states, and especially across in Ohio, especially, right? And ones that had been destroyed and ones they thought they were. And if you configured them, they seemed to form mirrors of celestial maps and line up with certain lunar cycles. And it was discovered that there's a reason why Indiana is known as, the crossroads of America, that this Mound State Park, where these very important mounds was a place that Native Americans from all these different tribes, especially from the Northeast, from Canada, for the Delaware tribe, the Biloxi tribe, which was part of the singing manatee legend that I told earlier, they would all meet there. But of course, they didn't have a common language. And what she told me was that this word Pukwudgie, which is an Algonquin word, right? It is a Wampanoag word, was actually used by different tribes to explain these creepy little things that they were seeing that were causing them trouble in the woods. And that Wampanoag became almost an umbrella term that they would use. Like we might say monster. Well, what kind of monster? Well, it was an abominable snowman, or it was, it was this. And Pukwudgie became the generic term for a lot of these tribes for these little creepy monsters that were causing mischief and were said to be responsible for deaths. And once I discovered that, and once I started tracking Pukwudgies through other tribes, it was just amazing how deep this is in the culture of the Native Americans and different parts of the world, but especially the Native American tribes in North America. And of course, you can easily say they're the same things as fairies and leprechauns, although slightly different.
Well, I only just found out about the Dover Demon the other night. Oddly enough, it was in one of those documentary shows that, Travel Channel. What travel? It's all paranormal all the time. Which is
Aren't
fine
those words
with me.
synonymous with each other now?
No,
Travel Channel, paranormal?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Pretty much. But from the drawings, the sketches I saw from witnesses that were independent witnesses, they seem to be like weird versions of grays.
Yeah. And that's why Joe Citro was saying specifically, you might think this is like, you might think the Dover Demon is a Pukwudgie, but it's completely different because, and then he went on to describe them as physically, like you're saying, which I thought was interesting because I know Joe, and why he felt that Pukwudgie was popular enough that people would confuse them with the Dover Demon was always odd. The only people who had ever written up to that point was the gentleman from Indiana, Lauren Coleman, Joe Citro, and then me. And so, I hadn't been, and I had to dig deep to find it. And so it was odd that he, when mentioning the Dover Demon, felt that people were going to get confused about something that really no one knew anything about. Forget it now. Pukwudgies are huge. So like everything, and if you go, as I imagine some of the people who are going to listen to this are going to go and they're going to search, Pukwudgies don't look anything like the way that they're represented now. People who dig the word Pukwudgie and the general idea of them have morphed them into this like drooling monster with porcupine hair and claws and that's not what I've ever gotten a report of them looking at. But as they've gotten popular, they've taken on the traits that people want them to have, because it's interesting enough and they love the word, and so they need to make it like more vicious than it actually is. Wow.
All right, we got about 9 minutes left, and so I'll pick out one of the probably a shorter one, I guess.
You've heard me talk. Nothing is short with me now. You're like, what's your name? Let me tell you for 23 minutes what my name is.
How about apparitions of Flight 40? Was it 401?
401. Yeah, Flight 401. So, wow, you're picking all the ones that I've like rarely talked about on the air. So, and this is one actually we've never done a show on this. It was just because there's nothing to trip, right? In that, I'm not even sure you could attach it. Like legends are bigger than individual stories, and I think that the story of Flight 401 is compelling enough, and I think that none of it is folklore. I think that if it's either true or not true. It's either people are crazy or people aren't. But essentially what happened was there was a flight that went down. I can't remember whether it was Christmas Day or New Year's Day. I believe it was Christmas Day in the Everglades. And all of these people died. I can't remember the exact number, but it was, and of course the captain died, the co-pilot died, the pilot died, the co-pilot died. A person who had gone down kind of below the plane to investigate. There was something wrong with the autopilot, and he had gone down there. He had died. And so in addition to several people who died as passengers, the captain and some of the crew passed. And the important part of that is that after they were able to retrieve things, because of the expense of so much of this, and the fact that some of it was actually preserved by the fact that it had landed in the swamp, they took parts of this plane and they used it as replacement parts in other planes. I believe it was Eastern Airlines, which no longer exists, which is why I think that there could be a break in this story at some point. But where they had replaced parts of Flight 401, people started to see ghosts, right? And they started to see ghosts of, like, there would be a random person in the seat who would then disappear, or they would see weird things flying on the wing, or they would have odd malfunctions of the equipment. And it was the equipment that had been replaced. But then also people were starting to see the ghosts of the captain, the pilot, the co-pilot, and this guy who had fallen. And they knew them in real life. And they're like, wait a minute, I don't understand. Why are you here? And he's like, listen, you need to land the plane rather than continuing on to your destination. And they landed the plane, and they discovered that there was a problem. That would have, if they wouldn't have detected it, and they might have crashed because of it. And this went on for several years. And the sad part about the story is that back then, Eastern Airlines obviously put the kibosh on it, right? They didn't want people to know what was going on. They didn't want people to actually think that the airplanes were haunted, and so they put a lot of gag orders on these employees. And so the story kind of comes out in bits and pieces. And there's been a movie about it, and it's been featured. One of my favorite paranormal shows, which no one remembers, it seems, was this show that only lasted a season called The Others.
I love The Others with Juliette Nichols.
Exactly. Beautiful. Thank you.
That's when I fell in love with her, yeah.
And what's his name?
The guy who played...
the guy from Suits. Whatever his name.
I was thinking of the guy who was in the newscasting He was in Sneakers. Played Morrow. Oh,
I
it's
can't.
been so long. And now I have to look it up.
No. We might be. I don't know why, but my Alexa just went off. I guess it's telling me I'm talking too much. But anyway, they have an entire episode. They have an entire episode that's featured about it. And it's one of these things where, like, well, what would I trip? Like, people say they see weird things in the Everglades where the plane crashed. And I'm like, well, I ain't going into a swamp for a legend trip. Like, I'm not gonna trounce through the Everglades at night looking for what could be easily explained by something natural. And I've never been able to follow up with employees from Eastern Airlines because most of them are either dead or they're still hesitant to talk. But it is one of those stories that it's another hashtag follow the signs, because I bought the book Ghosts of Flight 401 and then moved here. Like the next month we decided to move to Florida, and I had no idea. It wasn't even on my mind. I was actually going to move to North Carolina. And it kind of felt like, oh wow, like there's this is great. Florida's going to be great. I'm going to be able to investigate and write stories till I die. And then 10 years later, I start tripping on legends.
Wow. All right, Barbara, Jeff, we got like 4 minutes. Any quick thing you want to say or ask? No. Okay, Barbara.
Well, like I said, it's fascinating. Florida has some really wild stuff happening anyway. Mm-hmm. I mean, there's always a story coming out of Florida.
Right.
I mean, almost every day there's a story coming out about Florida. So I don't know if you know about ley lines or any of that. What about specifically about Florida is it that there is just so much going on?
Well, I think that Florida, there's this place called Silver Springs, which is in the book. It's an absolutely beautiful place, and it capitalizes on the idea of there being this beauty and yet something savage about the land as well, right? And Tarzan was shot there, and Creature from the Black Lagoon. And I think a lot of Florida is like that. It has this beauty to it, and yet if you go to touch that beauty, you get your hand chopped off by a gator. Right. And I think that paradox, that dichotomy, plays on people. And I think that that both that beautiful and yet something dangerous is the reason why a lot of people have this kind of jerk reaction to things in Florida. And then there are so many towns here. You're in Ohio. You guys are in California. I'm from New England. When a town fails, first of all, towns don't fail, right? I taught in Lawrence, Massachusetts, and all the buildings in Lawrence, Massachusetts, when the mills went under, they became other businesses, and they became practice halls for bands. That doesn't happen in Florida. When something bad happen and a town fails because the railroad goes away, people either just leave the town, or they literally cut their houses down, put it on something, and move to another location. And I think that idea of this abandonment, and you're in the middle of the swamp, I think that adds a lot to the kind of way that people perceive life in Florida, and creates these weird things. That and a lot of drugs.
All right, we got a little less than a minute and a half. So why don't you tell people how they can follow you and come check out all your stories like that? And then we want you to stay on until after we're off, and we'll talk with you for a few minutes.
Excellent. Well, the easiest way, if you want any of the books, is to go to Amazon.com. I've got 9 of them. So some are on the Bridgewater Triangle. Some are, I've now finished my first one in Florida, which is Haunted Florida Love Stories. The website is trippingonlegends.com. The podcast is also called Tripping on Legends. So wherever you get your podcast, whether it's Stitcher, whether it's iTunes, whatever, it's a really interesting show. Listen to 3 or 4 episodes, especially the older ones. And if you like it, put a like on it. I'm sorry, I was just listening in the chat room. Someone mentioned I used to work for Spooky South Coast. Yes. And the Facebook page, which I think is really the dumping ground for a lot of what we do. Like it ends up being on the Facebook page is, facebook.com/trippingonlegends. I do my show every Tuesday live, and I do it through Facebook and IG, and I'm on midnight.fm. It's a little bit of a different show now that I don't have a co-host. I kind of am doing it myself and kind of, exploring legends in a different way, but it's still a really interesting show to listen to, I think.
All right. Our time is up. We're going to run. We will see you next week at the same time. So until then, this is Henry Foister,
Jeffrey Gould,
And Barbara Duncan.
See you next week at the same time. Good night. You've been listening to the Paranormal View on the ParaX Radio Network. Join us again next week at the same time for more of the Paranormal View.